Thank you, Greta, for this nice introduction. Is it working? Can everybody hear me? And thank you also, Alexandra, for having me here. Indeed, Kadriorg and me, we go back quite some time, and it's an honor to be here today and to speak about someone whom I have been familiar with for a long time, but of whom I have not published a lot. To sketch the context of this research, in 1994, my thesis advisor, Karel van de Velde, asked me to prepare a study of the Franken family, Ambrosius and Franz Franken, who sort of shared the context in Antwerp for the length of Maerten de Vos's career. They were actually colleagues or competitors, if you wish. And so whenever I studied the Franken family, I always bumped into Maerten de Vos. And so it's a wonderful opportunity and an even more perfect excuse for me to sort of delve or tiptoe into the career of Maerten de Vos. Now, this lecture will reassess somewhat the career of this renowned painter, and we will turn away a little from the traditional emphasis on style, iconography, or even attribution, but we will come back to it a little later on. And instead, we will examine a dense constellation of archival evidence. I love archives, I love documents. And so I took the opportunity to reassemble the material again and to see what's there. So we shall see Maerten de Vos as a multifaceted figure embedded deeply within the institutional, professional and familial environment of late 16th century Antwerp. Now, the central question, of course, the archives, a place where lots of labor of love is being done, not by many people, as you can see, but, well, we should all go to the archives, and the more, the better. But the central question that I would like to put here, and which we will not answer today by far, so don't even hope for it, is how can we understand the scope and the complexity of this monumental artistic personality? Because believe me, there is still a lot of meat to the bones. So we shall be trying to sort of put different elements of the answer before you by looking at roles he inhabited simultaneously. Painter, of course, humanist, guild official, character witness, husband, son, father, brother, and a member of an extended artistic dynasty. By referring to his family as a dynasty, this lecture also puts to the foreground the importance of female members of the household, which is, as you may know, a perspective that aligns very well with current research approaches that treat women as integral participants in artistic enterprises rather than peripheral figures. And while delving through the material, apart from Maerten, quite a lot of female names popped up. There's Anna, there's Barbara, there's another Anna, and we will see them return time and again. So there's an interesting chunk of research still to be done there. Now, the historiography of Maerten de Vos also shapes the need for this renewed study. And I am projecting here the magnum opus of anyone wanting to deal with 16th and 17th century Antwerp and the history of the Antwerp school of painting. So you're already sort of being pushed in a certain direction. A monumental book by a monumental figure. I put a photo of him there, Frans Josef van den Branden, and his work that dates from 1883 is in many ways still a book that we cannot do without. Now, apart from this, there is also, of course, the monograph study by Amin Zweite, Maerten de Vos als Maler, from 1980, a perfectly good book, which is still the stepping stone of any Maerten de Vos research, but hey, that's 1980 already. So perhaps it is time, and I'm happy that Greta and Alexandra took up the glove, perhaps it's more than time to revisit Maerten de Vos. A monumental painter, draughtsman, artist, as I've just said. We have about 1,600 prints to his name, which is huge. You can ask yourself, when did he sleep and eat? It's an incredible oeuvre. Many dozens of drawings. There is an old catalogue available, but I think more will turn up. And more than 100 authenticated paintings to his name. And we won't even mention all the different copies of the different kinds. And so monumental is the word here. Now, before we go on, how do we visualize De Vos? What did he look like? I always like to put a face to a name. Here I just put two of his portraits. Of course, the best known likeness remains the engraved portrait by Jan Sadeler, with a laudatory Latin epigram praising De Vos's intellect, his purity of heart and diligence at the age of 60. And there are also a few crypto portraits, as I like to call them. I don't know who coined the term. I like to believe it's me, but I'm not sure. But in a few of his larger religious works, you can see him, he painted himself on it there in the corner. There are a few more examples, and perhaps some more will turn up. It was a topos used by 16th century painters, or those that I've studied, to insert themselves. A bit of a visual signature, if you wish. We have one description by Karel van Mander, the artist biographer, but he never seems to have met De Vos personally. He calls him a tall and portly man. Okay, maybe he had it from hearsay. But so, a face to a name. But let us start with the beginning. And the beginning is not only his stay in Italy and his mastership, but we have to go before that to understand who Maerten de Vos is. And indeed, it might not be clear for those sitting at the back, but this will be our main document for today. Not a painting, but the family tree, because it will make you understand the dynamics of an artistic dynasty. So we have to begin at the beginning. At the top, on the left, in the little red square, is Maerten de Vos's father, Peter de Vos. And Peter de Vos seems to have been from Leiden or Gouda, the Netherlands, and his parents had relocated to Antwerp early in the 16th century. Now, Peter de Vos was a painter in his own right. He became a master in 1519 and 1520, and he had a steadily rising career in the early 16th century. He was dean of the Guild of St. Luke, so that means he has an important administrative position, and that also testifies of his solid professional reputation and his embeddedness in Antwerp's artistic community. By 1543, he had also secured a stall to sell art in the prestigious Our Lady's art market. And so you can see that already he is interested in the art market. Unfortunately, as we speak, few works can be securely attributed to him today. There is a bit of work still to be done, if ever we can put together a corpus. Now, Peter de Vos also had 4 or maybe 5 apprentices across several decades, and so you can see that the structure of his workshop already indicates the artistic atmosphere in which Maerten grew up. He grew up in a very busy artistic studio. So Peter, in addition to his 2 sons, in addition to his 2 sons, he also trained other apprentices. Now, Peter and his wife, Anna does not seem to have had any artistic inclination, but the couple raised probably 4 children. First, a daughter to the left of whom nothing is known or nothing much. Then, second daughter, Barbara de Vos, whom we shall return to, and two sons, Pieter de Vos the younger and Maerten de Vos, our Maerten. And the two sons will also become painters. Now, Barbara, the second daughter, would, I think, deserve a study of her own. I sort of regrouped the material that is available, and there's a very interesting profile that emerges. And she first married Pieter Lizaert, first husband, and I'm putting another family tree made by Van Rooij, an historian and archivist, who studied the Lizaert dynasty, a very important painter and art dealers dynasty. And with Pieter Lizaert, she had a son, Pieter Lizaert the younger. And then in a second marriage, she married Maerten Allijns. Maerten Allijns, one of the most prominent art dealers in Antwerp. He was the guy, he was the padrone, he was the person in the middle of the web. And so this network, of course, further embedded not only Barbara, but also Maerten within Antwerp's artistic and commercial milieu. Now, we have sketched the beginnings of Maerten de Vos in his father's workshop. The precise date of Maerten's enrollment in his father's studio is not recorded. The guild ledgers, or liggeren, are sort of complete, but not completely complete, and depending on who kept the records, we have found that people were omitted or put in the wrong year. So it's an incredibly wonderful source, but sometimes information is simply not available. Now, guild practice suggests that Maerten would have started around age 15. Of course, for painters' sons, they ran around the studio as a child, so he may have, and as he seemed to have been rather precocious, he must have been there earlier. So let us say, hypothetically, that in 1547 he started in the workshop. Now, formally, apprenticeships lasted 4 years, but in reality, it extends over a much longer period of time, because we see, for those whom we have a date of their mastership, that they didn't stay 4 years, but they stayed 6, 10, sometimes 13 years in the workshop. So that means that many young painters, after having finished their proper apprenticeship, stayed on in the workshop as a journeyman. And they were probably paid either by piece or by contract, before eventually securing their master's title, for those who did. So this means that Maerten likely stayed quite some time in his father's studio. He learned what a bustling studio was. He learned all about the St. Luke's Guild, professional etiquette, reputational dynamics, and he already was there within the networks that would later support his own career. His own future role as a guild dean echoes the path laid out by his father and illustrates the significance of inherited social capital in Antwerp's artistic culture. By 1551, at roughly 19 years old, Maerten seems to have completed the Antwerp phase of his apprenticeship, and he left for Italy. At least that is what art historians think. It's probable that he did. Travel to Italy had become a recognized path for young, promising artists, and the de Vos family must have been financially secure enough also to facilitate such an undertaking. It was not cheap to cross the Alps and to live there in Italy for some time. So Maerten's father's position within the guild and his network would have again have acquainted him with the experiences of earlier travelers to Italy. Now, traveling at 19 was not exceptional for talented master's sons, and many sought to complete their education by confronting Italian and antique art firsthand. But such journeys were expensive, and young artists typically supplemented their resources by undertaking commissions in Italy or doing all sorts of chores and assistant work along the way. It is also likely that if indeed he went to Italy, that he traveled in company. Now, this whole Italy story would also deserve some more research. As I just said, we only have indirect and partial information. Karel van Mander, who we just mentioned, the artist biographer, he mentions Maerten de Vos in Rome and Venice, but there is, as of now, no archival trace to be found yet. We must see, maybe something will turn up. No archival traces, but quite a lot of stilistical traces, because it aligns reasonably with the stylistic evidence of de Vos's mature works, and you can pick out all the different Italian and antique references. Now, another red herring is that scholars have hoped for a long time to place him in the company of Peter Bruegel the Elder. He went to Italy, that we know, in the spring of 1552. But much as we would love the two to have gone to Italy, we don't know. There is one letter from Scipio Fabius to Abraham Ortelius in which Fabius requests news of both Bruegel and a Martino Vulpe, Maerten de Vos's Italianized name. And so this letter has been taken to suggest his travel to Italy together. In fact, beyond Van Maander's and Fabius's testimony, it remains to be seen how we can actually fill in these years. Now, stylistic analysis places his route through Lyon, as we have in the altarpiece of the Peltiers, which we will the Furriers, which we will come back to, we have a clear reference to the work of Salviati, which was in Lyon at the time. He is usually put firmly in Venice, as his work testifies of the very fresh, clear, cool color palettes that is typical of the Venetian painterly school. A little lovely drawing by Bruegel just to keep you in the right mood. Now, the chronology of Maerten de Vos's return is also uncertain, and Zweite puts it at 1556, but it's usually taken to be 1558 or thereabouts. Now, Bruegel came back between spring and autumn 1554. De Vos was certainly back in Antwerp by 1558 as he becomes a master in that year. Now, during Maerten's absence, the professional continuity of the De Vos dynasty was sustained by his older brother Peter, who became a master 4 years before Maerten did. Now, the guild ledgers list him not as a painter at that time, but as a gilder of broomsticks. A designation that has contributed to an under-evaluation of Peter's artistic abilities. Yet, he is documented as a painter a few years further on. He has an apprentice, and the humanist Bucelius, writing in the early 17th century, praises him as a good master and an excellent painter. When we are talking about Peter de Vos, as in all artist dynasties, there might be a bit of confusion. We have Peter the Elder and Peter the Younger, and so sometimes they get mixed up. So it blurs the distinctions even further within the family. Now, Peter de Vos's marriage in 1554 to Anna Liefrink is also of much importance. Anna Liefrink was a daughter of the very important Augsburg-born printer Hans Liefrink, who had a huge commerce in Antwerp. And as important, Anna was a niece of the engraver and art dealer Minken or Wilhelmine Liefrink. Now, Wilhelmina is one of the movers and shakers of the Antwerp art market. There was an article about her a few years ago of her work for Plantain. So we are in a very interesting sphere there. Now, after Peter's death, Peter the Younger's death in 1569, Anna Liefrink emerges more visibly in the sources. She's active in the art trade and well connected in the art world. Their son, Willem de Vos, and their daughter, Anna de Vos, will also be active in the art world. So you see it sort of spreads, among the dynasties. Again, Anna de Vos, their daughter, would marry a painter, David Remeus, who was an apprentice to Maerten. And I have a bit of a hunch that we need to look into David Remeus a little more. He's not well studied. There's a bit of a corpus of works around him, but it's not very clear. There's a lot of not so good attributions. So maybe David Remeus, I think he might emerge as somebody important within the De Vos workshop, and maybe at the time the wedding at Cana was prepared. But it's further food for thought. We must return to Antwerp now. Maerten de Vos, he's back, and he becomes a master. He consolidates his artistic position. And he marries Johanna de Boek. Johanna de Boek, strangely enough, seems not to have any artistic inclination. Nothing is found in that respect. She was from northern France, probably, from the region of Valenciennes. And the research, as it is known, places her within a well-to-do family. They had lots of land in the region of Valenciennes. I think there's some more research there to be done to see which milieu exactly she came from. Now, the couple had 8 children that we know of, 5 daughters and 3 sons. And the sons, Daniel and Maerten the Younger, also became painters, and we will return to them later on. The daughters we do not know, or they did not marry artists, probably not. A nice view of Antwerp a bit earlier by Dürer, again to keep you into the atmosphere. Now, Maerten de Vos, we can actually follow his footsteps in Antwerp quite well. He's recorded often in documents, and he appears, and you could call it as a character witness, to testify of Antwerp citizens, of, for example, their religion. So whenever somebody, an artist, wants to go to another country, he needs a certificate, and for that certificate you need 2 or 3 people of good standing to vouch for you and to guarantee that you are of good character, that you have not committed any crimes, and that you are of, at the time, Catholic religion. And we see that Maerten de Vos is asked time and again. Of course, he was the dean, of course he was a master, he also was, he knew his way about. Of course, the interesting thing with these testimonies is that you can actually see in which milieu he lived and worked. For example, he testifies in 1561 for a sculptor who was staying in Augsburg. So again, Germany will, or the German regions will pop up time and again. So we can see him embedded in the artistic milieu. Now, in 1561, he also takes part in a rhetorician festival. It's called Landjuweel in Flemish, in Louvain. And there he meets with all sorts of humanists and rhetoricians like Pieter Baltens, the printmaker and artist, Jacob Grimmer, Cornelis and Frans Floris, and Hieronymus Kok, the famous publisher of Bruegel prints. So slowly he also becomes part of Antwerp's artistic and humanist elite. So, okay, we've done some archival work here, but what about his early works? Well, these are two of his earliest known and dated works from 1562, a half-length Ecce Homo in St. James's Church in Antwerp, based on the famous Modello by Titian and emulated by many 16th century artists like Michiel Coxey and Willem Key. It was one of the best-selling subjects in the middle of the 16th century. And then one painting out of a cycle of Rebecca. This one is in Rouen, Musée des Beaux-Arts, a cycle of 8 paintings, of which 6 survive. And here you already see his interest in producing monumental cycles, could be for a church, a dining room of a very rich merchant. But in order to paint such a cycle, you need quick thinking, you need to be able to choose the subjects, you need to be able to plan the work because it has to be finished and installed at a certain date, and you need a large workshop. So already here, right at the beginning of his career, we see that he emerges as someone who likes large commissions. And this is not for every painter. The same, a few years later, in 1564, he takes a first apprentice, a certain Balten van Vlierden, of whom nothing much is known. Interestingly enough, from that period, we have a couple of documents regarding the place where he lived. And there again, there is some more research to be done. It's a little complicated because you have to work back from the current street and the house that is there right now, and you have to work yourself back to the 16th century. But we know where he lived. He lived in Schuttershofstraat, and it's the little, it's not the blue dot, but it's just the arrow above the blue dot. He took up residence from the 1560s onwards in a house called Tobias on Schuttershofstraat, which he initially rented. He will buy it later on. You're all curious what the blue dot is, I suppose. Well, that's Rubens's house on Wapper, of course. A different time, but anyway, that's just to, I guess many of you know more or less Wapper and Rubens's house, so that's to inform you about the scale. Now the little blue square on top is the cathedral, and the little arrow above, the one on the left of the blue square, is where his father lived, on Lombardevest. Now the street where Maerten de Vos lived, he wasn't the only painter there. He lived amidst a bustling environment of artists, clavichord makers, and the like. Now, in the 60s, and those of you who are familiar with Antwerp know that the 60s are a very complex and a very tumultuous period in Antwerp. In the 60s, lots of stuff happens. Again, we have a testimony, an interesting one, because it says something about Maerten de Vos's character. Because what happened on the 4th of October 1564? Well, there was the burning, an execution by burning, of a reformed Bruges citizen, Christian de Smet, also known as Christophoros Fabricius. And it was all a public spectacle, so there was a scaffolding, etc. And so everything was in place to start the burning. But there was a riot that erupted amidst the people looking at the execution. And so there is a testimony whereby Maerten de Vos tells the city what happened. So Maerten had been standing by the well on Grote Markt, on the central square, perched on a large stone. And he had watched the atmosphere darken, and he had watched the tension build up. And he said suddenly that the atmosphere changed and stones were thrown, people were shouting. And then he said, well, I fled as quickly as I could. And then they asked him, yeah, but who were these people? Who were the rioters? Did you recognize anyone? Can we sort of arrest anyone? He says, well, I don't know. I don't know how many people were there. I don't know the names. I have no information really. And he says, well, they were young rascals and by no means decent people. So, okay, that's done, and he sort of, he escapes any further interrogation. But it's an interesting episode because it illustrates the tense atmosphere that prevailed in Antwerp in the years leading up to the iconoclasm. Yes, this is the Schuttershofstraat, and the blue arrow is the house that's there now. Of course, that's not 16th century. But by going into the kadaster, you can delve back and hopefully maybe research for this exhibition by an historian architect. Maybe we can arrive at the exact place and a more clear view of the house. The old photo from the 1860s is the other side of the street at Heidetakse. That's now a very chic shopping street. And at the right, you can see the comedy, the theater building, which is still there. But let's go back to rioting. 1566, a momentous time in the history of Antwerp. I put a little archival document which I found in a volume of inventories, of confiscation inventories. And I still remember the moment when I just turned the page and it's inventories of people whose belongings are confiscated. Then, okay, you have rooms and paintings, and I turned the page and all of a sudden there was this description. And you could feel several hundred years after 1566, how the clerk, who had noted paintings and all sorts of things, how he needed to put this on the page, how emotional he was. So that was a very poignant moment in the archives. And I translated it. It's a visual description of the clerk who must have been there. And he says, well, on St. Bernard's Day, on the 20th of August, being a Tuesday, after Our Lady's procession at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, a great gathering was made of various persons, both young and old, in Our Lady's church here in Antwerp. And when my lords, the margrave and the burgomasters, learned of this, they went there and had the said people and assembly dispersed. And so then, of course, that was not a good solution because the rioters became furious, and the text goes on. Between 5 and 6 o'clock thereafter, they began to destroy the altars, images, chapels, the great choir, and furthermore, the whole church. Why am I telling you this? Well, because painters such as Maerten de Vos and the Franken brothers, whom I studied more extensively, profited in a sense of the emptying of the Church of Our Lady, but also all the other churches and cloisters. Because they needed paintings, they needed altarpieces, and so who better than Maerten de Vos and his colleagues? But 1566 was also a tumultuous year on a personal level for Maerten de Vos, because his father died. Peter de Vos died in 1566. The year after, Peter the Younger dies, so it must have been a difficult time for him. We have a few more character witness reports. So he is asked to testify for his nephew, Peter Lisaert the Younger. He goes to France as a very young man, and de Vos has to testify that he's of good character and that he can travel to France. Now, France, besides Italy, was a very important country for young artists to reside. We have the court at Fontainebleau, where the whole of Rome, all the statues of Rome were available in copy, as François Ier had wanted a museum of his own. He had wanted Rome to come to him, so everything was there. And there was also the art market of Saint-Germain. And we see also in the commercial documents a steady trickle from Antwerp to Paris and vice versa. There's also a birth in Maerten's family, so his son Daniel, who will become his apprentice and later a journeyman. Now is the time also to turn to some more major commissions. I already told you that he was very much drawn to making large cycles or series. So that's his talent, really. He can do it. He has the knack for it. And this one is also very interesting. It is a series of St. Paul, different situations and subjects around St. Paul for a prominent Calvinist Antwerp merchant and ship owner Gillis Hoftman. And so I am showing you here the St. Paul in Malta, that is in the Louvre. Now, you can see the little yellow rectangle there, and that is also a crypto portrait, not of Maerten, but of someone who played an important role in the commission. And this is, for those who know him, it's Abraham Ortelius. And Abraham Ortelius was a good friend of Maerten de Vos, and he mediated for this commission. And so you can see that Maerten de Vos is firmly embedded within the Calvinist merchant niche, with Ortelius, with the humanists. And so his reputation is steadily building. And then, of course, we need to mention Celle. I haven't been there yet, but it's I so would like to see it. The large commission, monumental commission in Celle. It seems to be in restoration right now, closed as far as I know, but I can tell you I will want to go there in the future, and I will go there. So again, large commissions which you have to be able to do. It's complicated, it's complex, and you need to have quite a lot of personnel in your studio because, of course, he must have painted quite a lot of it himself. It remains to be seen. It would be interesting to study all this in detail, but without his studio, I mean, it would have been absolutely impossible. Now, the commission in Celle was executed between 1569 and 1576 for Duke William the Younger of Brunswick-Lüneburg in Lower Saxony. And it's a hugely ambitious cycle. Everything's there, the crucifixion, the flood, the Last Judgment, you name it, it's all there. But more interesting is that the patron, the Duke, was Lutheran. So we see him gradually moving from Catholicism to a more Lutheran religion. We cannot pinpoint the exact moment. Zweite, at least in his monograph, sort of remains vague about it, but it will become quite an important fact about his life, which we will return to. Now, I've tried to find out whether he went to Celle regularly, Maerten, but I have no answer to that. What is clear is that he sort of is, in a way, not stylistically, but commission-wise, a precursor of Rubens, because Rubens, later in his life, remarks that he's more drawn to the large-scale project than to small-scale projects. For Rubens, no miniatures. No, he wants big stuff. He wants to be able to sort of cover whole ceilings and whole walls in paintings. And I think that was something that popped up while researching all these large commissions. Now, by the early 1570s, clearly, de Vos's career is gaining momentum, and he maintains close ties with Antwerp's elite. Again, here with the Gillis Hoofdman, here portrait with his wife, painting in Amsterdam, Rijksmuseum. And also interesting is that he exhibits a profound literacy and attention to sources in his work and letters. You will see lots of letters, lots of open books, lots of manuscripts, lots of documents in Maerten de Vos's work. He likes his paintings to be correct, to be. He likes to put the sources there as proof. So, of course, these references that feature prominently reflect both his erudition and his meticulous approach to history painting and portraiture as well. Yes. So, by the late 1560s and early 1570s, well, okay, there's no doubt Maerten de Vos appears as a young master consolidating his workshop, embedding himself in Antwerp's complex familial and professional networks. And you are asking me, what is this? Well, there's a little yellow square or rectangle in the middle. That's Maerten de Vos. And all these little dots with lines are three-phase kinship and professional network men in blue and women in red. And it's from a database called Ecartico. And I invite you to sort of try it out. It's huge fun. And so you can type in, there's a little, if you go into the website of Ecartico, it's a Dutch website. And it actually, all sorts of names have been put in with links. And you can type in an artist's name from 15th, 16th, 17th century. It's concentrated on the Netherlands. You can type in a name, you can have the family network, and you can have the three-phase kinship network. And then for someone like Maerten de Vos, it explodes. I mean, poof. So this crazy thing shows you how embedded he is. You can do it for Bruegel, who is also quite well embedded. So you can try it out. Have fun with it, I would say. But we must move on to professional maturity. And yes, the elephant you see here and who pops up again, it's from Schwerin, an early work, which is also interesting in his humanist interest in the natural world. Perhaps that's also a very nice topic to research, de Vos and the natural world. Part of the humanist and Latinist sector has been researched, but I think there is still a bit of flesh on it. Now, right, in 1571-72, he becomes co-dean and dean of the Guild of St. Luke. That's about the best you can do. And so he oversees administrative and social functions of the guild. Deans had to sort of be present at baptisms, at funerals. Whenever there was a problem or a dispute, they had to mediate and settle. So he basically has to go from door to door, being helped by the alderman of the guild. But he's actually the spider in the web in the 70s. This is a very nice Bruegel print of the Sint-Jorispoort, skaters near the Sint-Jorispoort, to keep you in 16th century Antwerp. Now, the familial and professional ties extend even further. We talked about Anna Liefrink and how she comes to the foreground, niece to Minken Liefrink, and they are linked to prominent figures such as Frans Huys, the Bruegel epigone, and the geographer Mercator and the cartographer Ortelius. And Minken Liefrink worked for them, did coloring for them, was a little cheaper than several men, as far as I was able to read. And so they all said, well, we want Minken. So in the 70s, De Vos also served as a dean of the poor box of the Guild of St. Luke. Now, what is this poor box? Poor box is a sort of a precursor for social security for ill masters and their families, their widows. So if they fall ill and if they contribute, they can have a bit of money out of that box. But don't think that they will get rich. It's barely enough to buy bread. I think it's more a symbolic gesture than anything else. And there was also, of course, lots of help between the painters, lots of, other help besides financial. But this further demonstrates his professional role. Now, that year he also produces his first altarpiece for Antwerp Cathedral for the Guild of the Peltiers, the Furriers, and to keep you in the atmosphere, a lovely picture of the exterior and the interior of the cathedral, all white. You can see the pillars without altarpieces. That's not how it was, because here is a not so very good picture, whereabouts unknown. This is a photo of 1910. We don't know where the painting is, so I've kept using this photo, but that is as it was before. So you see all the pillars are altars, basically. This is my research when I research altarpieces, and the colors are all the different painters, among which the Frankens and De Vos, who contributed. And here is that lovely altarpiece of the Peltiers, the central panel, and then I have, unfortunately, in black and white, the side wings and the back of the side wings. And on the left, the little plan and the little dot says where the altarpiece was. And of course, the reference to Salviati. So here, De Vos, we can see him emerging as one of the major painters, also filling the cathedral as one of the most important places of Catholic worship with his vision. Very interesting is an apprentice that joins his workshop in 1573. He's called Wenzel Kuberger, and he will have a stellar career. After leaving De Vos' studio, he becomes a prominent architect engineer in Naples, and he later worked for the archdukes, of which you have a lovely portrait here in this room. In 1607, he becomes, he goes to work for them. He's also on the road to designing prints. I mentioned that he has about 1,600 invention of prints to his name. That's huge. I don't know how he did that, because you can see the amount of detail. His drawings are very nicely done, are very detailed too. So I don't know when he slept, when he ate, and when he did his guild work and his administration. So there again, we must probably look to all the people inhabiting his studio. We see him have other apprentices, a certain Hans Snijders, who's not well known, and also around 1575, Hendrik de Klerk must have joined the studio as an apprentice. So Hendrik de Klerk will also have a stellar career and will also make altarpieces for Antwerp churches. By 1576, the monumental Celle series is completed, and the following years, again, he takes on two apprentices. They are not further known, Jacques Kerel and Maerten Boly. So it must have been a huge house or a huge space where he worked. Of course, one can imagine that not everyone stayed. We don't always have records of when people become a master. We also don't know when they dropped out. And so it's not easy to have a precise cut of who was in the studio by any given year. So it must remain approximate. Again, portraits of prominent Antwerp people, the upper crust. Here again, this is a portrait of Antonio Anselmo and his wife from the Brussels Fine Arts Museum. Anselmo was a legal expert, very well-to-do. So here again, and you can see here again an inscription, very prominent. By this time, around 1577-79, he must have started work for one of the monumental picture Bibles that was published, the Thesaurus. You see here, for those who can see it, it's the 1585 version. There are two versions, a version of 1579. I think there are two left, one in Wolfenbüttel and one in Amsterdam. And most of the other cabinets of prints have the 1585 version or a 17th century version because it was reprinted time and again. These reprints of this huge number of prints that made up the Thesaurus will also have another consequence, and that is that Maerten de Vos's compositions were not only a constant source of inspiration for artists all through the 17th century, they also became a source of inspiration for painters in the New World, because it was fairly easy and cheap to transport prints to the New World. And so there are lots of churches in Peru and Bolivia. I haven't been to Peru or Bolivia, but you just apparently, you enter a church and you see what looks like a Maerten de Vos from far. So his influence is really worldwide, and part of it because of those prints. Peter Lizaert the Younger, his nephew, also becomes integrated into Maerten's workshop. So he's also someone, I think, someone we have to look for a little more. And then we have the birth of Maerten the Younger, the last child to be born, we think, and he will also become a master. So he's also continuing the dynasty, Maerten the Younger. So you can sort of feel that it is important for Maerten the Elder to have another Maerten in the family. At that time, he seems to have done so well that he purchases his house Tobias in the little yellow square, and you have another arrow on the other side, and that's the Jew Street, Jodenstraat, and that's where another very famous painter lives, David de Rijkere, also somebody to reckon with, but whose career seems to have been stopped short at a certain point. I don't know what happened. Maybe he got ill or he became blind, but he was a very prominent artist. And all of a sudden, we see that he lives on, but he becomes very poor, destitute, and he lives at the back of a house there, nearly at the back of Maerten de Vos. But it's a thing that's been boggling me. We don't know what happened. Another thing that happens at that time, and which extends his role beyond the purely professional, is that Maerten de Vos in 1581 is instrumental in rescuing a famous altarpiece of Quinten Metze's, altarpiece of Saint John the Baptist and the Evangelist, made for the Carpenters Guild in the early 16th century. But what happens? Well, in 1581, Antwerp becomes more and more Protestant, and many guilds sort of want to be done with their altarpieces that are, of course, prime markers of Catholicism. And so what do? Well, they sell off their heirlooms, and they the Carpenters tried to sell off their Metzes, and who was interested? Well, of course, Philip II and Elizabeth I. They said, this is an opportunity, let's get our hand on this sublime altarpiece. But no, it didn't happen, because who stepped in? Maerten de Vos, Super Maerten, saved the altarpiece. He negotiated, he knocked on all the doors, harassed City Hall, and finally the altarpiece was given to the City Hall, and they gave a house in exchange to the carpenters. Of course, this fortifies his position as a protector of artistic heritage. I mean, if you do that, you are a hero, I think. As a little afterthought, one might ask whether Pieter de Vos, Maerten's father, knew Metzeys when he was an apprentice, and when he was part of the guild. He must have met Metzeys, and Metzeys also lived not so far from where Pieter de Vos lived. But we will never know. It's a nice little fantasy. Sometimes, well, we must stick to the sources, but sometimes it's nice to have a bit of imagination, I think. So we must go on. We are nearing somewhat the end. Some more pupils, of course, Daniel de Vos, Jan Adriaansen as well, of whom nothing much is known. And now we are entering in a very complex period of Maerten de Vos's career, the years after the fall of Antwerp, from 1585, when Antwerp capitulates and becomes Catholic again. Antwerp is taken, to 1589. This is a little image of the war. What happened? Well, after 1585, you can actually look for altarpieces in the cathedral, for example, but there aren't. So this artist that has been making altarpieces for many Antwerp religious institutions, all of a sudden, in the years after 1585, goes numb, and that was something that I tried to research, and I think my answer is quite valid, and that is, we remember that Maerten de Vos was a Lutheran, and after 1585, Lutherans and Calvinists got 4 years to reconvert and stay, or stay Lutheran and Calvinist and leave. And so we see that Maerten de Vos, as he remains in Antwerp, he must have converted. But we see that during the 4 years that citizens of Antwerp get to reconvert, Maerten de Vos doesn't make a single religious official commission. So is this his 4 years in the desert, so to speak, that he was sort of put on hold for his misstep? I would like to believe so. Maybe there is other evidence, or maybe an altarpiece will turn up, who knows, but I would like to think that he was sort of paused in his career, at least for religious commissions. Now, as I said earlier, and we are nearing the end, David Remeus also joins the workshop, and he is someone, I think, to reckon with and to further study. This is one of the works attributed to David Remeus. As I said, there's not much, but maybe a small corpus can be found alongside. In the 1580s, late 1580s, Maerten de Vos also serves as a mediator, an evaluator of artistic work. This is by Michiel Coxey's son Raphael, and there's a dispute about the money Raphael should receive, and so Maerten de Vos is sent to assess this work and to evaluate it. And then the final years, more apprentices, his son, and a certain Hans Knotaert. And then, of course, we arrive at the little pièce de résistance, which is the altarpiece in Antwerp and the place in the cathedral, an interesting place, a very, very prestigious place too. And I'm also, to put you in the mood, putting a few details, and I think this is quite a good copy. It's quite well done. That was already clear when the catalogue came out. So, perhaps we will crack the nut. I don't know. I think we should try to crack the nut. Of course, right at the end of his life, 1603, the altarpiece for the St. Luke's Guild itself. I charted the history of this very complex commission, and Maerten de Vos only made the central panel. Did he die before he could do the rest, or was it already beforehand part of the commission that it would be done by different artists to give everyone his due? We don't know. The photo on the left is the chapel as it is now, with a 19th century altarpiece. And there again, on the left, the space it occupies in the cathedral, again, a very prestigious place. However, something that would also need to be studied, this altarpiece, which I've seen close by several times, is quite well executed, very finely done. Maerten de Vos was 70 at the time. How much is by his hand? Maybe that is something to look into. Here's a very bad photo. It's an awful photo. My apologies for that. So the wing on the left is by Ambrosius Franken, one of the painters I studied, and the one on the right is by Otto Venius, one of the rising and prominent painters. A couple of details, and the portrait of Abraham Grafeus in the middle, the one who's sort of making the pigments. He was the clerk of the guild, the factotum of the guild, and he is portrayed as the assistant of St. Luke, which he was in real life as well, and a wonderful drawing again. So, a very short conclusion. Well, I hope to have presented a Maerten de Vos fit for the 21st century through the prism of the archive, of course. And we could have done much more iconography-wise, much more paintings. But I think the message I wanted to give you today is that Maerten de Vos emerges less as a solitary master than as a broker of artistic legitimacy whose social capital, administrative presence shaped the Antwerp artistic milieu in the second half of the 16th century as much as his artistic vision. Thank you. Questions?
Yeah. I do have one.
Yes.
It's a pleasure to be here, Natasja. We work in Brussels and a couple of hundreds of meters from each other, so it's funny to be in Tallinn to listen to a talk about this fascinating painter. A question is dealing with a moment you mentioned when he acts as, and you call it, the protector of artistic heritage, yes, which is like a very modern concept, as if he would be a monuments man, saving artworks to be exported out of the Low Countries. But is there a possibility there is something more behind just protection of artistic heritage? Is there something in for him in this deal where the city gives a house, so we have an idea of the value of the painting at the time, a house, in exchange for a painting of Quinten et Seis, who must have been considered like old-fashioned style in the period in which he was working?
Well, actually, he was considered as the founding father of the Antwerp, not the school of painting, that's an invention of Van den Branden in the 19th century, but he was considered as the precursor. And so, artistically, we see that he is a source of artistic influence. For example, in the work of Frans Franken, whom I studied, you see that he delves back into Metzese's painting for an altarpiece of his own. So after 1585, there was so little preserved of the original heritage of the cathedral that anything that was saved, such as Maerten de Vos's altarpiece, became legendary, had a near mythical status, as far as I know. And as to protector of the arts, well, interestingly, Maerten de Vos wasn't the only one saving altarpieces. Frans Franken, again, also saved an altarpiece in 1581 by Michiel Coxey, an altarpiece that is probably not preserved, but there is a testimony that he actually climbed into the church opposite his house, and then at night he sort of got out all the panels through the window and put them in his house. And so there as well, you see that these artists are trying to protect the works of their precursors. In this case, Michiel Coxey was still alive when Frans Franken saved his painting. So, well, and Coxey was the Philip II's painter. So, well, that must have done something for Frans Franken's reputation as well. Coxey being a bit, well, vain, a bit of a diva, he must have been much touched by this action. And so, yeah, maybe there's a subject there as well. Perhaps Maerten de Vos, well, yes, maybe, I think that's a good remark, yeah. To sort of list all the different reasons why he would save that painting. I don't know if there was money in it, but there was a sort of a legitimacy, which was a joker for him after 1585. He had been a Lutheran, okay, he had to do his 4 years in the desert, but he had this joker, I think, which he could use, because after 1589, the commissions stream in as if nothing happened. So, yeah.
And in his network that you showed with this nice slide, is there also many people of this guild of the panel makers who were the owners of that altarpiece? Do you know
The carpenters.
Sorry.
It's not the panel makers. They were part of the Guild of St. Luke, the carpenters. It would be good to find out whether there was anything going on. Indeed. Sorry? For example, yes. Yes, maybe he was paid in kind. We don't know, but it's an interesting. It should be yes, sniffed out a little more. And maybe there are other instances of painters or artists saving work of their predecessors, maybe in Germany as well.
Rubens who collects these things at some point. Yes. As well. But if you just turn around and you look at the painting and you look at that figure in front of Jesus trying to bring the wine, and you look at the Quentin Massai's portrait, you have similar figures. You know, there is a continuity to that, and it's also a source of inspiration that is actively quoted later on.
I researched that for the Franken brothers. I did not for Maerten de Vos, but there must be quite a lot of citations or quotations from Métz. Yeah, and well, Métz, he had a mythical status already back then, during his lifetime, but also after his death. Yeah. Yes.
Just taking from your last point, how do we know that Franken wasn't just stealing the altarpiece, that he was saving it? Is there an evidence for that?
Yes, a document that says something along, at night I climbed into the church and I saved this altarpiece, and he puts it in his own house to protect it, and he later returns it to the church, and he actually loses a bit of money because he gets an amount of money, but it's not a good deal for him. So the deal was probably that he saved the painting and that he could use that also as a joker. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But my more serious question would be, how much do we know about other people? We know about we found out about the apprentices in his studio, but how much did he work together with the other people, for canvas makers and frame makers and so on?
So he did work together quite a lot for other great commissions, which I didn't talk about today, but which is also interesting to research further. He was also very active for ephemeris decorations for Joyce entries, where you had to work with artists, joiners, all sorts of artisans, and then there were prints made. It was all printed and published. And there, Maerten de Vos, as well as the Frankens, they are side by side. You can see those two as the overseers of the whole project, because it was a large organization with lots of artisans that had to be paid and planning to be made, and it was often at short notice, so it was very stressful, and you needed people who could oversee large projects. They were like I don't know what the word in English is, ploegbaas, like in a building. Yes, so they were the ones doing all the administration, giving out the commissions, planning everything, and designing everything too. And so that's a good example of a large commission whereby all sorts of people help. Every painter also worked together with a joiner, panel maker, gilder, and those would probably have been contracted separately. The panel was probably a separate contract, and the painter had another contract made. And then when gilding had to be done, that was also another contract because it was expensive. And so it was quite close-knit, and you often see the same people turn up, like Maerten de Vos, but mostly the Frankens worked with Otmar van Ommen, a very good panel maker, and antiek-snijder, so he was also into producing antique scroll work or antique decorative woodwork. Yeah, they lived next doors, all of them. So, yeah, I went to the same pubs and married all amongst each other. I didn't show you the Liefrink dynasty genealogy because I had no time. But that as well is. I mean, it's the same people turn up, but in a different constellation. And so, play around with Ecartico, I would say.
Yes, I just have a small remark. A month ago, we were on a study trip to Antwerp to see more works by Maerten de Vos with Mihail and with Claudia from Helsinki. She isn't here today, but there was we looked like many paintings, and we noticed that there were butterflies depicted, like in Saint Jerome of the Martenhuis painting, and then the Levitation of Saint Anthony at the Kaimska. And these butterflies didn't seem to have anything to do with the composition. They looked really like a two-dimensional and application-like. And then Claudia had an idea, and she Googled and said that this is the Kleine Vos butterfly. And then also we noticed on several paintings that he includes foxes, and some of the foxes seem to be like a part of the proverbs, but also the Anthony and St. James Church, you have the proverb fox there, and then you have a hidden fox behind St. Anthony. So is it something that he did, like playing with words and images? And
he would have probably, I didn't notice that, but indeed it's a little rust orange colored butterfly, I think, for sure. Yeah, when I was a child, they were still there quite a lot. They've mostly gone now. But I had not noticed that, but indeed it would have probably be something that appealed to him. As I said, through his contacts with Ortelius and Mercator, the geographer and the cartographer, He was also much into naturalist illustrations. There's also a link to Lucas de Heere, to Hoefnagel, to all these artists depicting the natural world. So it's probably a pun on his name as well as a testimony of his interest in the natural world. For example, the Schwerin series is really nice with the elephant. There's a sort of a leopard-like creature as well. They're very enjoyable and tell us something about his interests, indeed, yeah. There's also dogs, there's not there, but dogs and all sorts of animals in his paintings. Yes, it would be an interesting topic and a very pleasing one too, indeed, yeah. De Vos and his animals, yeah.
Too, and De Vos and women.
And yes, and women, absolutely. But while doing research for this lecture, I was grouping together all the mentions of De Vos that I had, and then all these female names popped up, such as Barbara, and there's a nice article to be wrung out of it, I must say, yeah. So that was a surprise, which when I started my research on the Franken family, where the women probably didn't go into the artistic profession. Here it was, well, a very interesting and very unexpected path. Yeah. Other questions?
And these were the prints, so the printing activity, they were print for the, so he was making drawings,
Yep.
but the income from selling was the editor.
Yes.
Was actively
yep.
Starting or initiating
Yep.
the edition. So.
Yeah, and it's there that his influence becomes monumental, of course, when you compare him to the Frankens, for example, because Ambrosius Franken did do inventions for prints, but that stopped after 1580 or thereabouts. Whilst Maerten de Vos, like Rubens as well, and Van Dyck, they had a huge number of prints, and that was, of course, essential to the dissemination of his influence and his style. Not reproduction prints like Rubens and Van Dyck, but still his prints were available, and there were lots of reprints, like the Thesaurus had the Visser edition all through the 17th century. And some of those prints for the Thesaurus, not the Vos, but the Van Heemskerk prints were, well, from the first half of the 16th century, and that people were still buying that in the late 17th century. It's incredible. And that you find the Vos in Peru and Bolivia, it's incredible. And there's, I think there was research being done on Flemish or painters from the northern Netherlands and their influence in the New World, but well,
there was also a particular St. Michael image
yes.
by De Vos
yes.
in Southern America.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, my question is about, well, thank you very much for this amazing lecture. It's wonderful. In fact, it's this last topic, the Maerten de Vos and America, because as you know, in Mexico nowadays there are several paintings.
Yes, I forgot Mexico, of course. Sorry. Yes. Yep. Yep.
And it's really interesting when they arrive and who was the promoter. And well, I don't know if you have found any kind of clues through your archives sources.
No, but it's something that is worth finding out more about. Yeah, and I think local painters in Mexico and Bolivia and Peru use the prints mostly.
Yes, but in the case of Mexico, there are originals.
So they, I think they went to Spain first and then traveled to.
That yes, I think the Spanish archives would yield quite a lot still. Yes, Yes, indeed. Yeah.
So in the list of ships, because they had the listed number of items or sellers.
Yes, but then that would be 17th century, like yes, the big art dealers, yeah, like Forgond, Musson. But for the 16th century, not much is published. So
Neil de Montfort did something. I don't know how far he went into details on his students, if there's more material, but Neil was the one who did the South American.
yeah, it's true. Yeah.
Thank you very much.